Joining us now to talk more is former Israeli government spokesperson Eylon Levy. Thanks for being with us, Eylon.
Good to be here, Anna.
All right, what do you make of this headline? We let the senator weigh in. What do you think about Israel delaying the release of these 600 Palestinian prisoners?
Israelis were horrified to see the dead baby parade that Hamas put on last week, and we want reassurances they're not going to do that again. Almost all the hostages have been dragged through humiliating spectacles. Just yesterday, we had 2 hostages who were dragged to the ceremony to watch their friends being released, while Hamas filmed them begging for their lives inside a vehicle just behind the Red Cross cars. One of the hostages there was forced to kiss his captors. And then, of course, we had the horrifying spectacle of the coffins carrying Kfir and Ariel Bibas being paraded on stage next to the body of an 83-year-old peace activist who was murdered in captivity, and another coffin that wasn't even carrying the boy's mother because they sent us the wrong body. So Israelis want to be assured that the next 4 bodies of murdered hostages who are expected to come out will come out without a dead hostage parade. And when Israel has those assurances, then the ransom arrangement can proceed.
It's so disgusting and dark to watch these ceremonies, as they call them, the propaganda that they're trying to push and trying to show power through all of it. But we talked to the father of Israeli-American hostage Eylon Alexander, and he told me that actually he just wants the hostages home. He doesn't care about how sick and disgusting these horrific, ceremonies are. He just wants his son and the others home. Let's take a listen to what else he told me.
I'll just tell to our leaders, to the Israeli leaders, to our leaders in America, that I really don't care if those hostages being paraded, or if there are any ceremony. I don't care about ceremonies. I don't mind if he gets out through and being paraded through the ceremony. I want them home. It doesn't matter right now if they're being paraded. We know what we are dealing with. It's a tough opponent, and we have to deal with it.
Yeah, so what do you make of that argument? It's twisted what they're doing. Just let them do it so we can get them home.
Yeah, I hear his perspective, and we're all terrified for the fate of his son, who isn't scheduled to come out in phase 1. He needs to come out in phase 2. I think what Israel is interested in doing is making sure that when there are red lines set for this agreement, for this ransom, that they are honored. We've made a deal with the devil that is trying to push the limits, trying to see how much it can squeeze, and Israel wants to make sure that it sticks to its side of the deal. But here's the problem for getting Eylon Alexander out. He's not part of phase 1. He's meant to be part of phase 2. In phase 2, there is meant to be a full Israeli withdrawal in exchange for all of the live hostages. But there's a pretty fundamental disagreement between Israel and Hamas. Israel wants to get all of the hostages back and make sure that the Hamas terror regime is removed from power, because it's threatening to do October 7th again and again, and we cannot leave it free to take more hostages again, as it's threatening to do. Hamas wants to use the hostages as insurance to make sure that it stays in power. So in order to get Eylon Alexander out, we need global pressure on the Hamas terror regime and on its state sponsors, specifically Qatar, Turkey, and Iran, to force Hamas to let the hostages go and not try to keep onto the last hostages as insurance.
So you've outlined what some of these obstacles are for beginning the negotiations even. Is it going to happen? Is phase 2 going to happen?
I think at the moment, both Israel and the United States are trying to extend phase 1 as much as possible. Because, as the families are saying, there is no such thing as hostages who should be on a humanitarian list and those that aren't humanitarian cases. One of the hostages trapped in Gaza, his name is Alon Ohel. He was abducted from the Nova Music Festival over 500 days ago. He still has shrapnel in his eye from when Hamas death squads threw a grenade into a shelter where he was hiding. Hostages report he's only seeing shadows with one eye and he's at risk of going blind. We know that the hostages are being held in pitch darkness. One of the hostages coming out today saying he was held alone for 450 days in a dark and cold tunnel. So Israel and the US would like to see phase 1 extended, which means in exchange for a pause in the fighting, we get more of the hostages out who are genuine humanitarian emergency cases. And negotiations will have to begin for phase 2. But as I say right now, Israel and Hamas disagree fundamentally on what that means. And it's important that the United States is making its voice heard very clear, saying no, Hamas does not get to remain in power after October 7th, and while it's threatening to do October 7th again and again. This war has to end, and it has to end with all the hostages home and with the Hamas terror state dismantled.
Yeah, I mean, we can't forget about these conditions. Living underground, shackled, starved, tortured,
Horrific.
being alone for hundreds of days. I don't think I'd even know my name anymore after all of that. Earlier on News Nation, Aviva Siegel, who was a former Israeli hostage there by Hamas herself, and her husband, Keith Siegel, was released just a couple of weeks ago. She told News Nation, she told Morning in America host Hannah Doba what her message is for Prime Minister Netanyahu. Take a listen to this.
Get them out now. Don't even think of doing any problems, because we need them back now. We need them back alive, and we need all the families to feel what I feel when Keith came home. I feel like a different person. I was just so worried about Keith all the time. Nobody deserves to go through what I went through.
And the reunion that they were able to have, we want for all of these other families, too. And we see the anti-government protests. We've been showing live pictures this weekend of that, saying, don't blow the deal, bring the other 63 home. What kind of impact do statements from former hostages have on government decision-making in those protests that we're seeing in the streets?
Yeah, Aviva Siegel has been a real warrior since she was released from a tunnel herself where she was held hostage, fighting for the release of her husband Keith and now fighting for the rest of the hostages. There is a real struggle by the hostage families to keep their plight at the top of the national agenda, to make sure that no one can forget them, that everyone is reminded day to day of what the hostages are experiencing. But you know, in Israel, we're living the hostage crisis every single day. None of us are more than 2 degrees of separation from a hostage or a hostage family because we're a very small country. My fear is that the hostages are going to slip out of the international media attention. Because when you're trapped, being starved and cuffed and held in a dungeon, you know, there aren't new images for the international media to run. And people, we fear, are going to grow bored of the hostage crisis and forget about them. And that's why it's so important that the hostage families keep speaking out in English, giving interviews on shows just like yours to remind the whole world of these 63 hostages who are still trapped in the dungeons of Gaza. Over half of them have been killed, murdered, in captivity, or at the moment of their abduction, to remind everyone that they are being starved and tortured and treated in the most inhumane conditions. And we need global pressure on the terror regime that took them hostage to release them immediately and unconditionally.
I just got chills on my whole body. Yeah, and they're tirelessly speaking out. Their strength is unbelievable to be able to do so. And we understand they're doing a really big push this weekend because they believe time is running out. Former Israeli government spokesperson.
Time ran out long ago.
Eylon Levy, thank you.
Thank you, Anna.